Hello friends, welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to look into calculation groups and especially when we're using calculation groups and how does it interact with the other visuals on the page, which can be very challenging. In this particular video, I will walk through how a card visual showing some the numbers and using the calculation group in another visual is changing the card visual itself, which we actually don't want to do. Let me quickly go through the Power BI and explain the problem, and then we will look into the solution. So here what I have is in this particular page, I have a matrix using by month sales and quantity. Again, the dollar sales and dollar quantity. This is coming from a calculation group. And let me walk through what the calculation group look like. So here I have is a calculation group called analyze what, and it has two line items in it, two calculation items. One is called sales, which is nothing, is just returning the sales measure, which is sum of sales. And also I have did the format string for this because I want to see dollar sign, and that's how I want to see my sales value. And I have another calculation item is quantity, and that's just a sum of quantity, and then it is the format string for this is a number. So why I'm using analyze what, or I created a calculation group because I want give the option to the user if they want to see the sales or quantity in their visual, so they can pick one over another or they can see both of those. For example, in this particular case, if I put a let me from analyze what we have, if I put this as my slicer, now it gives me the option to what I can see in my visual here. So I have a sales if I really want to see the sales, and or I want to see the quantity, I can see one of those. So that's why I'm using calculation groups, so that a person can really use select the what measure they want to see. With the field parameter, that is possible that you can use the selection for the measures, but this particular video is going to talk about calculation group, and basically when working with the calculation groups you have to really pay attention when you're designing the solution. So now, in this particular, again, in a matrix visual, what I have is month on x-axis or rows, and the analyze what on the columns, and then the selected measure. I just put the sales measure in there. Doesn't matter what measure we use because the calculation item, if the dollar sales calculation item is used, then that is returning the sum of sales. If the quantity calculation item is used, then that is returning the quantity. So it does not matter what measure we use on the value section, the calculation item is forcing what to return, and it is also forcing what the format should be. So this is everything is working fine. Now, if you pay attention here, I also put two card visuals. One is sales and one is the quantity. In this card visual, there could be any other card visuals on your page, not necessarily sales and quantity. It could be number of orders, it could be percentage discount, average, or whatever this could be. But the challenge is still going to be the same. To demo the issue, so I have in this particular card visual, I'm showing the sales measure, and in the quantity, I'm showing the quantity measure, which is perfectly fine. Now, here is the a problem statement or the challenge. If I select a row in my matrix visual, so if I'm selecting March, everything is working fine. This is giving me $497,000 sales and 150 quantity, and everything is interacting and working perfectly fine. Think about if this was an average or some other measure, so everything is working fine. But the challenge comes as soon as I select a calculation item or a column from the matrix visual. See what happens in the card visual. So if I selected the sales, what happens is because we force it to select, we forced selection, which is a calculation item dollar sales. So now my measures are returning, does not matter what measure I'm using in the visual, it is returning me the sales amount. So here I'm seeing 30 million sales and 30 million sales for the quantity. And if I select the quantity, the same issue, the total quantity showing me 60,000 numbers, and similar for the sales and quantity. Now I don't want this to happen. I want my card visual to stay as it is and not change, like if a quantity is selected, the dollar sales should not change to the quantity, or when I select the sales, the quantity should not change to the dollar sales. One school of thought could be, oh, you know what, we can change the edit interaction between the matrix visual and the card visual, and when we select anything in the matrix visual, it should not filter our card visual. But that is not going to solve the problem, because if I select March 2018, I still want my card visual to be filtered for that specific month. So it means I want my card visual to filter based on the matrix visual. So doing the edit interaction would not solve the problem. And another problem here is, for example, if I'm not selecting from the matrix visual, and if I'm using slicer, I want my card visual to always show me sales and quantity, but on my slicer, I decided to pick quantity because I want to see only the quantity in my matrix visual. So it shows me the quantity, but what happens to the card visual? The same problem, because we have selected a calculation item which is quantity, and it is forcing to return the sum of quantity in our calculation item. That's our business logic provided there, and that is what is causing that these two card visuals are showing the same value. So and similarly, if I use the sales, then that's what's happening here. So what's the solution for this? Because this is a very common scenario where you have a calculation groups or calculation item used on a page in certain visuals, but then you have another visuals which does not need to be, should not be have the impact from your calculation items. So in this particular case, so the solution is going to be what I'm going to show. There could be many other solutions, but this is what I decided to do. So what I did is I created another calculation item. Let me show you a calculation group. I called it analyze what. Again, my main calculation group is called analyze what, because I have two measures you want to analyze, so sales or quantity. I made a copy of it and created another calculation group called analyze what KPI, just to differentiate from that. And the similar thing I'm doing in here, I'm returning the sales and I'm returning the quantity. So how does this is different than what we were just doing? So this is where the precedence of the calculation groups become very, very important. What the precedence means, and there's a lot of documentation around that, but I will just quickly walk through that. So when you are creating a calculation group, you set the calculation group precedence. What in this case I gave the number, it could be any number, I gave the number 20, and for my analyze what KPI I gave the number 10. What does this means is the highest precedence number, that calculation group will be used first and will be evaluated first, and then the next one. So it's on a descending order. So if I make my analyze what KPI, let's say if I make its number to 50, so this will be evaluated first. If I'm using both the calculation groups or the items from these both calculation groups in my visuals, in that particular case, in this particular case, if the value of analyze what KPI, the precedence value is 50, which is higher than analyze what, because the analyze what precedent is 20. So this particular analyze what KPI will be evaluated first, and then the analyze what will be evaluated. But this is not what I want. I want my analyze what to be evaluated first, and then analyze what KPI. So I'm going to make the change it back to 10. So precedence is really, really important. Again, this is based on how you want your calculation groups to be evaluated. So basically, if you are using two different calculation groups or items from two different calculation groups in your visuals, this precedence will determine what evaluated first and then second and third and so forth, so on. So now once I have this and apply these changes, I already created another page. So if you look in this particular page, I have the same thing. I have a month on rows, analyze what on my columns, and then the selected measure sales on here on my value. So that again does not matter what I use, I my calculation item is returning the respective measure. Now on this card visuals, what I did is I use the sales measure, I drop it in there, and on quantity I use the quantity measure. And what I did in this one is I filtered my analyze what KPI for dollar sales, and because that's what the analyze what KPI has the two items in it, and and the first card visual I filtered it for dollar sales, and second one I filtered it for quantity. So now how does that plays a role? Actually, end of the day in the model, I will hide my analyze what KPI because this is just for the visual purpose. I just need for my card visuals to work. Otherwise, it does not have any value, and I will hide in my model just in a as in a best practice. So how does this made a difference? So let's see if I select a March 2019. So this is working perfectly fine. This was working before as well, and I have 385,214 quantity, perfectly fine. The challenge last time was when we were selecting a calculation item, both the card visuals were showing the same value, and if I selected sales dollar, it shows the dollar sales for both the card visuals. If I selected quantity, it showed the quantity for both the card visuals. But let's see what happens, what we just did. So if I select the sales here now, so if you look at that, the sales value is 5.9 million. This is perfectly fine. And my quantity value is 397. If I just remove units here, just quickly, call out value and change it to none. So my card visual and decimal place is 0, for example. So now my card visual is 3397. So this is perfectly fine. If I pick up a single column here, what my card visual is showing, it's showing $410,000 for my sales, but for my quantity is showing 219 because that's what it is. So this is now my card visual does not matter if I select a single calculation item or a single cell of a calculation item. The quantity card visual still showing a quantity, and the dollar sign sales is still showing the dollar sales. Let's say in this particular case, if I select 219 and I'm still getting the 219 quantity and I'm getting $410,000 as in a sale. So this is working perfectly fine. But you guys probably already noticed the formatting of these measures are now getting messed up. So before I go explain what's happening there, but let's look into that. If I select a slicer from my a calculation item as in a slicer, and my numbers are still working fine because it's the matrix visual, it's showing the sales now only because that's what we selected, but my quantity is still showing the correct 3300, but the formatting is not correct. And when I say quantity, my quantity is showing up 3397 and the $6 million. So this is working perfectly fine, except the formatting is now not correct. And now the question comes out to be why the formatting is not correct. But let's go back into our calculation group. So even my analyze what KPI, I have given the format string which I wanted for each calculation item. So for sales, I set it to be dollar, and for quantity, I set it to be non-dollar value, just a number. But regardless of that, even the precedence is analyze what calculated first, evaluated first, and analyze what KPI is evaluated after. It is still the card visual, the values are coming out correctly, the quantity and the dollar sales are coming out correctly, but it is still applying the format string from the first analyze what calculation group. I don't know, it's a bug or it's an issue, or maybe I'm missing something here. So the solution for this, what I found is, maybe if you know why this is happening, why the format string which I gave on analyze what KPI, why it is not getting applied on my card visuals and why it is using the format string from analyze what instead of analyze what KPI. So the solution for this, what I found is, what I did is I created a new measure called dummy KPI. So what I did is in dummy KPI, I just created a measure and gave the value 0. And then in my card visuals here, I used a dummy KPI in both my card visuals, and let's put it in there. And what I did is I called it sales, change the label. So the card visual show the correct value, label, category label. So I said quantity. So this is working fine because the numbers are still showing up the correct numbers. Even I use a dummy KPI because, again, going back to calculation items is returning the respective measure. So in this particular case, because this card visual we filter on dollar sales, and that's why it's giving us the sales dollar amount, sum of sales, and this one we filter on quantity, and that's why we are quantity. But the format is still not working as we expected. So to make the format fix, what I found is, what the solution for that is, I went to my original analyze what the main calculation group, and in my format string, what I did is, let me actually cut and paste the formula, which I already have, instead of typing here. So what I did is I said, okay, if not is selected measure, if my dummy KPI measure is not used, then use this format. Otherwise, use selected measure format string. So whatever the measure format string I'm using, just use that. So basically, in my format string expression, I'm making a condition that if I'm using a dummy KPI, if I'm not using a dummy KPI, then use the dollar sign in my dollar sales calculation item, because I know my dollar sales is in a dollars. And in otherwise, just use whatever the selected measure format string is. Again, this function is a calculation group functions, and they are very, very powerful. And similar thing I did for my quantity. So in my quantity, and go to the format string expression, I said if I'm not using the dummy KPI, then use the number without decimal. Otherwise, use the selected format string. So this is working. So once I applied this logic in my format string in my both calculation items, so let's apply these changes and see if that fixes the issue. Here you go. It's already, you can see I have selected the quantity here. So this is showing the quantity, and my card visuals is now showing the correct format and the correct value. So if I select the dollar sales, it is showing the dollar sales value in the sales with the dollar sign, and the quantity with the no dollar sign. So if I remove this slicer and I pick any data point here in my matrix visual, currently it is filtered for quantity for April 2019. My quantity is showing in my number, and my dollar sales is showing in the format what we wanted to use. So now it is using the format which we gave in the analyze what KPI. So if I, let's say if I select July 2019, my measure is my dollar sales, my sales card visually showing the dollar signs, and my quantity is showing the 246. Previously, without that having a separate KPI calculation group, this thing was not working as expected. So as you saw, when you're working with calculation groups, sometimes it can be very, very challenging. Even the small thing, calculation groups are very, very powerful. Even doing these small things can become very, very challenging, and then you have to think out of the box how to solve for it. I'm going to do another part 2 of this video, in which we will spend a little bit more time on the format string. In this particular case, we have a format string with the dollar sign only, and everything worked fine. But what happens if there's a format strings with the multiple currencies, and then we want to use that? Stay tuned for the upcoming part 2 video of the same this calculation group and how the card visuals work. Do subscribe my channel. Until next video, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Thank you.